Hey, welcome to FamiStudio 2.0. This is going to be a different type of tutorial than the ones we've done in the past. People have criticized my previous tutorials, saying it was too much like reading a user manual, and I agree with those people. So we're going to be a lot more hands-on. What we're going to do is that we're going to create a new song from scratch, no prior knowledge required, so this should be fun. At the end, when we're done, we're going to export it to a bunch of different formats because that's probably what you want to do. So let's listen to the song we're going to try to make. If you're looking for it, it's in the demo song. It's called Tutorial Song. Alright, as you can see, it's a very, very simple loop, very simple melody. It's kind of like a terrible song from a rejected Mega Man, but the purpose of the song is just to, it has a bunch of techniques I want to show you, so we're going to get to it. Alright, so let's clear everything and redo it. The first thing I'm going to mention before we get started is that I get a lot of questions about how to do this and that. Always keep an eye, that's the number one tip I can give you for FamiStudio, always keep an eye on the top right corner. As you move the mouse, it's going to show you all the keyboard shortcut, mouse, buttons. The UI has a way of looking deceptively simple, but there's a lot of hidden functionality sometimes behind double clicks and weird keyboard shortcuts. So please keep your eye on the top right corner as you move the mouse. The second thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to name things. It's going to make it a lot easier for the rest of the video. So at the top, we have what's called a sequencer. It shows the 5 channels that the NES support. There's always one that is selected. And this is where we're going to create patterns. Patterns are simply a group of notes that you may or may not want to repeat many times during the song. At the bottom, we have the piano roll. This is where we're actually going to draw our notes and our melody. And on the right, we have the Project Explorer. This is where we're going to create our instrument, edit our instrument, and edit some song properties. So that's about it. At any given time, there is always a selected channel and a selected instrument in bold. And when you play the keyboard, it's going to play the selected instrument on the selected channel. Another thing I'm going to mention that you cannot see, I have next to me a little MIDI keyboard. So sometimes if you hear sound coming out of nowhere, that may be that I'm pressing the keys on the keyboard just to rehearse the melody. And the same rule applies. The selected instrument is going to play on the selected channel. All right, without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to try to recreate the song how I did it this morning. Some people like to create a song by having the rhythm section first. For some reason, I wanted to have the melody first, so that's what I'm going to do. But, you know, you do you. So just to get an idea of the pacing, one thing I wanted to do is just to give myself like a metronome. And to do that, I used the noise channel because this is where our rhythm section is going to be in the future. But right now, we can use it to create some kind of a very, very simple metronome. First of all, what are we looking at here at the bottom? There's all these subdivisions, there's many types of lines, and some are dashed, some are not. Okay, first thing, I'm 99% sure that YouTube is going to completely destroy the image and you cannot see some of those subdivisions. It might be a good thing to have it open next to you and follow along so you can really see what it looks like. I might put an image if YouTube ends up destroying it with compression. So the very faint dash line that you may not see are they represent individual frames on the NES. They're 1/60th of a second. This is like the finest subdivision of time that we can have on this system. Basically, every 1/60th of a second, there's a frame, and we can choose to affect the sound by changing the pitch, the volume, etc. So this is as fine as it can go. And then between 10 of those dash line, there's going to be a full line. 10, right now the way it's set up, and we're going to change that later, 10 frames is one note. And every 4 notes, there's a darker line. This is just a bar. This is purely a cosmetic thing. And right now it's set to every 4 note you have a bar. You can change that if you want to do something like a waltz or something that's more like 3. And then every 16 note is a super big dark line. This is simply the end of our pattern. Our patterns have 16 notes. So let's get started. To be able to add notes, we need to add a pattern. You just click here. I did that earlier. You click, you add the pattern. Oh, actually, one good thing we should do is actually name the pattern. This is a good practice to organize your stuff properly. So every bar, I'm just going to add a note. This is a little bit too low. I'm just creating a very simple metronome. So let's listen to that. I'm going to press the space bar to play. And it just sounds like a bunch of noise. The reason why it sounds like this is that nothing ever stops the sound. It's a continuous stream of noise. So what I'm going to do is that at the end of each note, I'm just going to add a stop note, which is added by holding Control on the keyboard and clicking. And these stop notes, they look like a little triangle. They're going to cut the sound. Now let's listen to this. All right, good enough. This is going to be our metronome until we revisit that and create a proper drum loop. Here, so we have our pattern here. We can drag it, we can move it. What we want to do is repeat it multiple times. To do that, we start by dragging it and we hold Control. And we can do that 4 times. And we have now a longer drum loop. And it's important to understand it's the same pattern now. So if I modify one, it actually modifies all of them. So I'm just going to undo this. Now this is a little bit slow for me. I had something faster in mind. So I'm going to go into song properties, which is here. This is the name of the song, which, by the way, we're going to rename. This is a good practice to give names to your stuff. We call it tutorial song. And also in the project properties, this is that gray bar at the top. We can double click. We can add a title. My name is Matt. So we can organize things. So let's go back to this song properties. So the first thing we're going to do is that song is a little bit too long for us. You heard what I want to do. It's very, very short. So the song length right now is 16 patterns long. So we're just going to set that to 4, much, much shorter. Whoops. There you go. Now we have a very short song. And the second thing I mentioned, I want something faster. So right now our frames, our notes are 10 frames. So it gives us a beat per minute of approximately 90. And I want something a little bit faster. So I'm going to go to 7 frames per note, and it's 128 BPM. So that sounds fine to me. Now FamiStudio is going to be like, oh, you changed the length of a note. You want me to try to resize the notes by squishing them or, you know, elongating them. So I'm going to say yes. And let's see what happens. So maybe you can't see on YouTube because of the compression, but now we only have 7 notes. So we only see dash lines for 7 notes, and then we have a full line. Now let's listen to this. All right, this is more active. This is what I had in mind. So this is, until we have something better, this is going to be our rhythm section. By the way, if you've used a previous version of FamiStudio, you might have noticed that the tempo mode is a little bit different. Before we were setting the tempo and speed, which was a paradigm that comes from trackers. I am moving away from that. This is still supported, by the way. You can change the tempo mode in the project settings, but I won't cover this in this tutorial. Moving forward, I'm going to favor this new way of doing things. So it's about time we create a melody. Melody is usually created on the square channels. There's 2 of them. They sound identical. So we already used this kind of yellow instrument that was created when we created the project. So right now we're just going to rename that one drum temporarily until we revisit that. So we're going to create a new instrument for our melody and set it a color. The word instrument is used very loosely here. I would hardly call that sound an instrument. But an instrument conceptually is just a series of envelopes. And what we call an envelope is just a parameter that changes over time, like the pitch or the volume. And the 4 types of envelope we have for these type of instruments, they are these little kind of gray buttons that are here. The first one is the duty cycle. The duty cycle, and we can resize envelopes like this. The duty cycle is going to affect kind of the tonality of the shape of the square wave. It has 4 values, so we can listen to them. This is value 0, 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 3 sound the same. You're not hallucinating things. So So for us, we're going to go with 2. I'll try to put an image on top of the video when I edit it that shows like the different shape of the square waves, which each of the values. So 2 is this kind of perfect 50% up, 50% down square wave. It sounds extremely perfect. We're used to it. But these envelopes, they can also have different sizes. And as I press the key, the yellow line sweeps from left to right, and it goes it goes through each of these columns every 1/60th of a second. So it moves very fast. So every 1/60th of a second, we have the opportunity to change the sound. We can also do fancy things like making it loop. We can also do things, for example, if we look at the volume envelope, we could make the volume go up and go down. Again, we can make it, we can make it loop. We could do fancy things like I have a loop point and a release point where the envelope is going to loop over a small section and it's going to stay there until I release the note. This is really cool to make notes that kind of fade in and fade out very nicely at the end of the note. So we're not going to use any of that right now. For now, we're just going to set our envelope's length to 1 because we just want to set a volume for the instrument, like just 1 volume value. So we're just going to set that to 8, which is not too loud. Now let's go back to our melody, and we're going to create 2 patterns here. Melody 1 and melody 2. And we're just going to click and enter the notes. So to enter notes, we can click, but we can also drag, and we will hear like an audio feedback as we're dragging the note. So my little melody is just rehearsing here on the MIDI keyboard. All right, let's listen to this. Oops, this should be a C. All right, sounds good. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that to actually draw notes, you need a pattern. For example, if I try to add notes on the right here, even if I click, I cannot because there's just no pattern. So just so you know. But one thing to notice as well is that even though there is no pattern, the last note that we enter seems to be going on forever. And that's just the nature of how things works on the old NES. As you tell the NES to make a sound, it will literally make it forever. But that's not of our concern for now. We're going to revisit this melody later. But right now, this is a good enough placeholder. So we have our basic melody. Now let's try to create like a harmony to go with this melody. So much like we did before, we're going to create like 2 new patterns. We're going to call it backing 1 and backing 2. We're also going to create a new instrument, call it backing. And for this one, we're going to use the duty cycle 1, which sounds slightly more nasal than the 2 value we used before. For the volume, we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to create a 1-length envelope, and we're going to set it to, let's say, 7, which is a little bit less loud than our main melody. We don't want to overpower it. So now we have a challenge. We want to draw like a harmony that is on square 2 channel, but our main melody is on square 1, and we want to see both at the same time. Channels are kind of their own individual thing. So how do we do that? There's this little button here which toggles the display of a channel. What it does is that it's going to force a channel to always be displayed even when it's not active. It's going to be very faint, but it's going to be there. For example, here we have our little metronome track that we set before, and you can still see in red, very faint, there's our melody. So what it allows us to do is that if I enter like a note here for harmony, I can switch between the 2 channels very quickly. Whoops, and I can see both notes. Even better yet, I can use the keyboard, the key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to quickly switch between the channels. So if I press 1 and 2 like this, I can switch between the two channels very easily. So it's very easy to work between two channels like this. Even better yet, you can do Control 1 or Control 2 to kind of toggle that flag that we clicked on before, that little square here. So I'm just going to enter the notes. So the harmony is going to be something like this. Something like this, I guess. All right, this won't win any awards, but I guess it works. All right, now it's time to replace that little metronome thing we created earlier. I think we can do like a proper drum loop. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to that noise channel. We are going to rename the thing we call a drum. We're going to rename it as, call it hi-hat. And we're going to try to make a hi-hat sound. And to do that, we're going to make like a volume envelope that decreases very, very rapidly. That sounds about right. One thing to notice here is that because I create a volume envelope that ends at 0, that means I won't have to worry about adding these little stop notes. When the volume is 0, the sound just stops. So that's a good thing. It's going to save us some work. We're also going to create ourselves a snare. A snare, and we're going to use another volume envelope. It's going to be something like this, very simple. This sounds like a snare, right? Good enough. So I'm just going to delete all the notes because we're redoing it anyway. So I can right-click on the header here to select notes, and I can double right-click to select all the notes of a pattern and just simply press delete. So for the rhythm section, I kind of want something that sounds like. So I'm gonna try and do that. How would I go about doing that? One thing to notice is that because it's the same pattern repeated multiple times, as I am editing one, they're kind of all being changed at the same time, which is very convenient. Saves us a lot of work. So let's just do this. All right, this works. Now, one thing that's really missing is like a solid bass line. So that's what we're going to do next. And much like we did before, we're just going to create a new instrument. We're going to call it bass. The bass is going to be on the triangle channel. It has a very good sound for bass, especially in the lower register. One thing to know about the triangle channel, and it's again for hardware reason on the NES, it doesn't have any volume. It's either blasting at full volume or at 0. So that's kind of the reason why we've been setting these volume for our square wave, because essentially you end up having to balance all the other channel with respect to the triangle channel, because it's the only one where you don't have any explicit control on the volume. So that's one thing to know. So what I'm going to do first, so yeah, because we don't have any volume, we're not going to bother having a volume envelope. The triangle channel doesn't have any duty cycle. It's just a plain triangle wave. So it's going to be the most boring instrument. Very easy to set up. So right now I'm just going to add a bunch of notes. Oops, I need to create a new pattern. Bass 1, bass 2. I'm just going to enter a bunch of notes here. I'm going to separate them by stop notes, just to be sure we hear the attack between each of the notes. Again, I'm control clicking to add a little stop note. So let's listen to this. All right, that's much better. This is what our song needed. Now, because I'm lazy and I want to reuse what I did previously, I don't want to have to re-enter all the notes. I'm going to copy those notes to the other pattern here, and then I'm going to modify it. One way I can do this is I can select the note by right-clicking here, or as I said before, I can double right-click. It's going to select all the notes. And I Control C or Command C on Mac, and I can paste those right here. And if I want to transpose those notes, there's a couple ways I can go about doing this. So I can select the notes, and I can use the arrow key and press down. It's going to go by one step every time. And I can, another way to do that would be to use just drag and drop and just click on the notes and just bring it down. So let's listen to this. Cool. So that helps a lot. So I'm going to take these two patterns here and I'm going to duplicate them to cover the rest of the song. So if I select one pattern, if I hold Shift and I click, it's going to select those two. And I can drag them, hold Control, and then I just created a copy of the two patterns. If I want to be fancy and just a little bit flashy here, I can add slide notes between some of the notes here. Slide notes, they're going to appear as like a triangle. You hold the S key on the keyboard, you click on a note, and you again go up and down. And what it's going to do is that the pitch is going to start at the note that you draw, and it's going to follow the triangle essentially. So here the pitch would go up to try to connect with the next note, and here I'm going to do the same here. And listen to this; it's going to sound a lot more groovy, I think. Actually, let me change that. I'm going to transpose those an octave higher to add some variety. So to transpose by one octave, you can hold Control and press up, and it's going to go up one octave like this. And actually, let me change that slide note. I'm going to put it here. Oops. Like this. Let's try this. All right, that's cool. I like that. Now, one thing that's missing from our drum loop is it's kind of like a kick drum. Right now, it feels very weak. It's mostly like high frequency sound. We need a solid, like a solid kick drum. So to do that, we're gonna create an instrument. We're gonna call it bass drum. Now, typically, to create the sound of a bass drum on old school retro stuff like Atari, Commodore, or NES, what you want to do is have a rapidly decreasing pitch. Somehow that registers in our brain as a bass drum. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to use the pitch envelope and see if we can achieve that. And we're going to learn something in the process. So I want a rapidly decreasing pitch. I'm going to draw something like this. And now you're going to ask, why is it that when you draw the graph that goes up, the pitch goes down? And I'm going to reply, you're not allowed to ask that question. That's just the way it is. So as you can see, it kind of works, but it doesn't do what I want it to do. I want something that goes a lot deeper. One of the issue here is that the maximum pitch I can do goes from -64 at the bottom and 63 at the top. So it's not quite enough. This is what we call an absolute pitch envelope. So everywhere that sort of yellow line moves along the graph, it's going to read the pitch value and add it to the current note. So it's kind of limited between that range that we see on the graph. There's another type of envelope that is called a relative pitch envelope, which we're going to switch to and show you. To switch to relative pitch envelope, you double click on the instrument and you select relative pitch. Now it's going to ask me, do you want to convert? I'm just going to say no. And now you can see here it says relative pitch. The best way to show you how it works is that I'm just going to set a flat value. And as you're going to see is that as the yellow line moves from left to right, it's going to add the value of the graph to like a sum. So if I do that a lot more, I can, even though the value is flat, because it gets added, you can see the pitch now goes down, and it can go down really, really fast. Even better, we can create a single value looping pitch envelope and do something like this. Now we have something. Now we have a kick drum. So this is going to be our kick drum sound. We have a single value looping relative pitch envelope that just goes fast rapidly. Now, where do we put this kick drum? We have a challenge. We we use all 4 channels that we want to use. Obviously, the noise channel is not going to sound good. We want to use the triangle channel, but we already have our bass line there, so what do? Well, actually, what we're going to do is that we're going to steal some notes from the bass line, and you're going to be like, oh, this is not going to sound right, but trust me, somehow you're not going to notice that some notes from the bass line are missing. All right, let's give this a listen. All right, if you want to hear just the rhythm section. So as you can see, even though we lost a couple bass notes, somehow it's not too noticeable. Now let's go and try to finish our melody. We have these 2 last patterns here. Here I had in mind to add some kind of a rapid arpeggio. So these kind of fast chords. So that's what we're going to try to do. Arpeggio. Wow, spelling arpeggio. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to create. Actually, let's use the same instrument for now. We're just going to use the backing instrument. So it's going to be. All right, that kind of chord. So let me try to enter these notes. All right, let's listen to this. All right, that's exactly what I had in mind. Now, again, just avoid making a mistake, and just for the sake of laziness in general, I'm just going to copy those here, and I'm going to transpose them up 1 octave, Control up. Cool. Now the next one should start with a E flat. Again, copy paste and finish. This would be a G. Yes, that makes sense. And the next one should start with an F, I guess. Let's complete this. So G. That looks right. Let's give that a listen. Perfect. Cool. I like it. Now, just because we can, we're going to create a different instrument for that part. We're going to call it arpeggio. What would be a cool thing here is that it use these different duty cycle and kind of change it. By changing the duty cycle on the first frame, it's going to create kind of an attack. As you can see, like this is just 1, and this is 1 going to 0 on the first frame. It kind of creates an attack, as I said. And also we can just have a volume that's just going to decrease, something like, I don't know, like this. All right, something like that. So now how do we replace the instrument for all these notes? It's actually super easy. You can just select the notes, and you can drag the instrument on top of it. Now listen to this. Oops. Cool, it works. Now let's go back to our main melody. We have this kind of long note that we don't do much with, so let's try to do something there. So melody 3 and melody 4. So now that we've added these arpeggio, maybe we want to lower the volume a little bit, just so we can hear the arpeggio better. So of course we don't want to create like a volume envelope or something just for that one use case. So for this we can use the volume track, which is hidden in the FX panel here. There's various effects you can do, like vibrato, volume, and pitch. Like 99.9% of the time you should be using volume envelope, pitch envelopes, etc. to do that kind of thing. But here, because this is like a one-off thing, or we just want to globally affect the volume of the channel, we're just going to use the volume track. So the volume is full at 15, so we're just going to lower it a little bit slowly. Now, one kind of caveat here, kind of a technical thing, but at the end of the song, it's going to loop back to the beginning, and because we lowered that volume, it's kind of going to keep that volume low, even though it's coming back to the beginning. So just to be on the safe side, we're going to sort of reset the volume back to 15 at the beginning. It doesn't hurt. So let's listen to this. Pay attention to the volume. Cool, it works. Another thing we could do is that we could add a little bit of a vibrato, because we have this note that's just sitting there. So this is done through the vibrato speed and vibrato depth, so it affects kind of the shape of the sine curve that is used for vibrato. So I'm just going to eyeball this here. I have no idea what the right values are, so I'm just going to try some values, and don't forget to turn it off at the end of the song here. So let's try this. This is insanely fast and way too deep. So I'm just going to try this and this. And it's just solo. Alright, that's more like it. I like this. That's what we're going with. Cool. Now let's add a little bit of an intro to our song. It kind of starts really, really quick. We're right in the melody. So I didn't mind to have a little bit of an intro. So now we're going to extend the song by one pattern, and we're gonna need to move everything we did just one pattern to the right. So to do that, you right click on the header and you select all these patterns and you simply move them. And now we made room at the beginning for our intro. So for the intro, our melody is kind of going to be super simple. I just want a few notes to get us in the song. Yeah, something like this. So I'm just going to enter the notes here. All right. Now we have a problem. Like, I want the song to start like around here, and this pattern is like too long. So one thing we could do is that we could take these notes and shift them to the right, but then we would start our song with silence. So that's not what we want. We want like to shorten this pattern. The way we do this is in the sequencer here, you double click on the 0 on the header of a pattern. And here you're going to have a bunch of settings that are extremely similar. They're the same value as when we changed the song properties. And we can say, hey, I want a custom pattern here. And for this one, we're just going to need 10 notes. We're not going to change anything else. As you can see now, the pattern just got shorter. And there's a little star that got added to the 0 to tell you that, oh, this pattern, by the way, has some custom settings. So pay attention to that. Cool. We can even have fun and add a little bit of a slide note here. Cool, that's more like it. We can just finish, actually I forgot to give this pattern a name. We can just finish the rest of the song. I'm just going to copy paste some stuff. Actually, another way you can copy stuff, you can move selection around by dragging, but when you start dragging, if you hold Control, that's actually going to create a copy. So that's what we're going to do here. So that's another way you can do that. There's copy paste. There's a bunch of ways. Cool. Now the bass should also have an intro. I hope I'm getting this right. And here I'm just going to create like a big drop because I think it's really cool. All right, so it works, but now, I don't know if you noticed, but at the end it kind of loops back to the intro. We want to kind of keep the song looping in that middle portion here. And to do that, the way it loops is that it's always going to loop at this little arrow thing. This is called the loop point. And the way we move the loop point around is by holding L and clicking. So we can move it anywhere we want. So we're just going to put it to 1 here. Now we have a song that just loops in this section. It's going to play the intro only once. One thing I notice here is that our bass drum still has these little stop notes here. They're completely unnecessary, so I'm just going to remove them. One thing I want to mention as well is that people ask me questions about stop notes a lot for some reason. I don't know if you've noticed, but I use very little. Using volume envelopes and things like that, you should really, except for bassline or in some situation, you should be using stop note quite infrequently. So if you're using them a lot, maybe you're using FamiStudio a little bit wrong. So just food for thought here. Now let's listen to our song one last time. Now, if you ask me, I think the song is pretty much done. But just for the sake of completeness, and just so we use all 5 channels, we're going to add samples to it. But I don't think it's necessary at all, but let's just do it. The NES supports very low quality sample. They are 1-bit delta PCM samples for the nerds among you. In English, that means they're very tiny and they sound really, really bad. And you cannot have a lot of them. So the samples are edited by clicking the little waveform here button next to the DPCM sample. And how it works is that for each keys of the keyboard, you can assign 1 sample. So to do this, right now we're just going to add like a simple bass drum and a snare, which we already have, so it's kind of silly. So when you click, it's going to ask you to open a sample. Samples are DMC files. Right now, FamiStudio does not give you any way to edit the DMC file or create them. So you're going to have to use an external tool like FamiTracker, or there's a bunch of other ones, so just Google it. These samples actually I've been taking from Castlevania, so they're not even mine. So I'm going to map the bass drum to C, and I'm going to map the snare to D. There you go. And then after that, it works pretty much like any other instrument. So I'm just going to create another pattern, and I'm going to add these notes. So it's going to be very simple. I really don't care about this part. And I'm going to duplicate it a few times, and we can listen how it sounds. So as you can see, it sounds a lot more convincing than the little noise channel we use. But yeah, samples should be used very carefully because you just have a limit of 16 kilobytes. Surprisingly, these 2 samples only take 576 bytes, so it's actually quite surprising that they're even recognizable. They sound pretty good for the size. Now, what to do with our song? The most likely thing you're going to want to do is probably export it to something else. If you're making an indie game or if you're a homebrewer, you probably want to export that to another format. To do this is the export button here. And this is all the formats that FamiStudio can export to. Wave format, I'm not going to cover it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to export a wave file. It's going to sound exactly the same as in FamiStudio. NSF, if you're into the Nintendo homebrewer scene or just a Nintendo nerd, you know what it is. It's a Nintendo sound file. It can run on actual hardware. So yeah, we're not going to do that right now, but yeah, you can do it. ROM, I'm going to revisit that later. And then FamiTracker text is what I'm going to show you. So we can export that to a FamiTracker text file, and we can open it. Sample, whoops, import text. And then so as you can see, the song sounds exactly the same. All the instruments have made it, all the samples and everything. So if you need for some reason to exchange data with FamiTracker, it totally works. The other format I'm going to mention is the ROM export. It's going to allow you to create an NES ROM that runs on an emulator or actual hardware. I'm going to insert footage at the end of this tutorial to show you that it actually works, so you don't have to take my word for it. And that's about it, honestly. That's our little hands-on tutorial. I hope it helped getting you started in FamiStudio. So please share your creations on social media, on YouTube. We need a larger user base. I think the software is actually getting pretty decent. We need more creative people making amazing songs with it now. Thank you very much.